By late afternoon, the mountain had gone quiet. The shouts were spent. The dancers had cut themselves raw. Smoke should have risen from Baal's altar hours ago, but the wood was still dry, the sacrifice untouched, the sky above Carmel, hard and bright after years without rain. One man stood apart from the crowd beside a ruined altar of the Lord, facing a nation that could not decide who it belonged to. That scene did not begin on Carmel. It began years earlier in a dim royal room where an old king could no longer keep warm, and where the future of Israel started slipping out of human hands. The book of 1 Kings opens at the end of David's life, but it is not a peaceful ending. David had forged a kingdom out of tribal loyalties, border wars, private grief, and fierce ambition. He had brought Jerusalem into the center of Israel's political and religious life, and with him came the promise that his house would endure. Yet, covenant promise did not cancel political danger. A dying king meant uncertainty, and uncertainty drew hungry men close. In the ancient Near East, succession was rarely tidy. The death of a ruler could open a contest of bloodlines, army commanders, priests, court families, and old loyalties. What looked like a family matter was really a national crisis. Adonijah, one of David's surviving sons, moved first. He had pedigree, beauty, and the confidence of a man who believed the moment had chosen him. He gathered chariots, horsemen, and runners before him, the old public signs of royal intention. He found support among figures whose names carried weight: Joab, David's seasoned military commander, and Abiathar, a priest tied to older lines of service. Their backing tells us how serious the attempt was. This was not a prince playing at ceremony. It was a bid for the throne while the king still breathed, but the list of those absent mattered just as much. Nathan the prophet was not there. Zadok the priest was not there. Benaiah, commander of David's guard, was not there. Solomon was not there. The fault line ran through court, altar, and army all at once. What Kings shows from the opening page is that Israel's crisis is never merely political. Power and worship, throne and covenant are already entangled. A kingdom might secure itself with force, but its future would be judged by something higher than force. Nathan saw the danger clearly. He and Bathsheba moved with urgency, not with swords but with memory. Bathsheba went in to the failing David and appealed to his own word. Had he not sworn that Solomon would reign after him? Nathan followed, confirming the threat and pressing the old king toward decision. There is no romantic haze here. Court politics in Jerusalem could be swift, hard, and calculating. Yet the writer also wants the listener to see more than strategy. David's choice is presented as bound up with divine purpose. Solomon is not simply Bathsheba's successful son. He is the son linked to the promise that a house for the name of the Lord would one day be built. So David acted. He ordered Solomon placed on the royal mule, escorted to Gihon, and anointed by Zadok and Nathan. The public nature of the act mattered. In a world without newspapers, declarations of kingship had to be seen and heard. Trumpets sounded, the people shouted. Jerusalem itself seemed to split with the noise. Adonijah's feast collapsed almost at once. Those who had gathered around him understood what had happened. A court conspiracy can look strong until legitimacy appears in public. Adonijah fled to the altar and took hold of its horns, seeking sanctuary in the oldest symbolic way he knew. It is a telling image. From the first chapter, men use sacred space not only for worship but for survival. Solomon spared him for the moment, but the mercy came with conditions. This would not be an age of innocence. The kingdom David leaves behind is rich in promise, but it is crowded with unfinished business, bruised loyalties, and men who know how power works. David's final charge to Solomon carries that same double weight. Be strong, he says. Walk in the ways of the Lord, he says. Then he speaks of Joab and Shimei, and the debts still hanging in the air. The old king knows that covenant faithfulness is central, but he also knows the throne will not stand if old violence keeps breathing beneath it. That tension drives the whole book. Israel's rulers must govern armies, taxes, trade, and enemies. But again and again, the deepest question will not be whether they can hold territory. It will be whether they can hold a whole heart. Chapter 2. Solomon inherited more than a crown. He inherited rivals, memories, and a kingdom not yet settled in its own skin. The early part of his reign is often remembered for wisdom, splendor, and peace. But 1 Kings lets the listener see what came first: consolidation. Before Solomon became the builder of the temple, he had to survive the court. Before he became a symbol of Golden Age glory, he had to make certain that the throne beneath him would not give way. Adonijah's second move revealed how fragile the peace still was. He approached Bathsheba with what sounded like a modest request. He wanted Abishag the Shunammite, the young woman who had attended David in his last days, as wife. In a modern ear, it can sound personal or almost harmless. In the politics of the ancient court, it was not. Association with a king's household could carry dynastic meaning. Solomon heard the request as a claim dressed in softer clothes, and he reacted with finality. Adonijah was executed. The first rival was gone. Abiathar the priest was removed from office and sent away to Anathoth. That act did more than punish a political miscalculation. It shifted the religious center of gravity towards Zadok and confirmed the priestly line that would dominate Jerusalem's temple establishment. Joab fled, like Adonijah before him, to the altar. He too grasped its horns. But sanctuary did not erase blood guilt. Joab had long served David with ruthless effectiveness, yet he had also killed where he should not have killed, and Solomon treated those murders as unfinished claims of justice. Shimei, once spared under restriction, broke the terms set for him and met the same end. Step by step, the new king removed the old instability. This is one of the first places where 1 Kings speaks with moral complexity. The text does not pretend royal power is gentle. It also does not leave the matter at mere statecraft. The writer frames these acts within a larger concern for order, covenant, and the dangerous inheritance of violence. In monarchies of the ancient Levant, transitions often ended in civil war or assassination. Solomon's harsh beginning may be read as political necessity, but the book forces a harder question underneath it. What kind of kingdom is being secured, and at what moral cost? Once his position was firm, Solomon turned to the deeper problem of kingship itself. How does a ruler judge a people he did not create, inherit a promise he did not originate, and govern a nation whose true king, in Israel's theology, is still the Lord? The answer begins at Gibeon. There Solomon offered sacrifice, and there he dreamed, asked what he desired. He did not ask first for long life, military triumph, or riches, though he would gain much of all three. He asked for a hearing heart, the capacity to discern between good and evil, to judge a people too great for him. That request matters because it exposes the ideal at the center of biblical kingship. Israel did not need a king merely to dominate neighbors or collect tribute. It needed a king able to align rule with wisdom and justice under God. Solomon's famous judgment between the two women claiming the same child illustrates this, not because it is clever in a theatrical sense, but because it reaches beneath testimony into motive. The true mother would rather lose her claim than see the child die. Solomon's wisdom is not magic. It is moral perception sharpened by the fear of God. And yet, even in these bright opening years, the signs of future strain are already present. Solomon marries Pharaoh's daughter, a move that speaks the language of international diplomacy. Royal marriages in the ancient world were treaties embodied in flesh. They linked courts, roots, and trade. But in Israel's story, marriage is never only political. Every alliance carries spiritual consequence because every household carries worship with it. The king who asked for a hearing heart is already entering arrangements that will later trouble the covenant. The social machinery of the kingdom also begins to expand. Offices multiply, districts are organized, supply systems are developed to feed the court. This is what state formation looks like. great kings do not live on charisma alone. They build bureaucracy. They measure grain, labor, timber, taxation, and transport. The splendor people admire usually stands on administrative systems most people endure. Solomon's reign will become famous for order, but order is never free. The text is quietly teaching the listener to watch the underside of magnificence. So the kingdom becomes established in Solomon's hand. The danger of immediate collapse passes. The promise to David appears secure. Wisdom has been granted. Enemies are quiet. Yet 1 Kings is too honest to let this sound simple. The same king who can pray for discernment can also wield lethal power. The same throne that rests on divine promise is defended by calculated human action. The same reign that begins with sacrifice and wisdom will later learn how quickly wisdom can serve appetite when the heart begins to divide. Chapter 3. For a time, it seemed that everything held together. Solomon had the kind of reign later generations remember, with longing because it gathered so many symbols of stability into one life. There was peace at the borders. There was wealth in the treasury. There was administrative order. There was a ruler whose judgments became proverbial. Most of all, there was the great task David had desired, but never been permitted to complete: the building of a house for the name of the Lord in Jerusalem. The temple project rose out of several worlds at once. It was an act of worship, a royal statement, a national center, and part of the broader architecture of kingship in the ancient Near East. Temples in that world were not simply places where private believers came to feel close to heaven. They were public signs of order. They linked deity, land, king, and people. They held treasure, hosted sacrifice, and marked a city as a sacred center. For Israel, though, the temple carried an added tension. The God of Israel could not be contained like the gods of the nations. Solomon himself says as much at the dedication: "The heaven of heavens cannot contain him, much less this house." The temple would not imprison God. It would stand as the chosen place where his name dwelt, and where Israel turned in prayer, repentance, and covenant remembrance. To build it, Solomon reached beyond Israel's borders. Hiram of Tyre supplied cedar and craftsmen. Phoenician cities along the coast were masters of timber, seafaring, and skilled production. Lebanon's cedars had long been prized in the region for scale, strength, and prestige. Their use in Jerusalem tied the temple to international networks of trade and labor. Even at its holiest moment, Israel's central sanctuary was being raised through political alliance, foreign expertise, and immense organization. That does not reduce its significance. It shows how deeply history and devotion are woven together. The work itself is described with a kind of measured reverence. Stones are prepared off-site so that the temple rises without the noise of hammer and chisel at the place itself. The effect is almost liturgical. It suggests order, intention, and a sanctity that reaches even into the process of construction. Inside are carved gourds, open flowers, palm trees, and cherubim. Gold overlays walls and furnishings. The imagery evokes a world half-royal court, half-restored garden. Sacred space becomes a reminder that Israel's story does not begin with monarchy, but with creation, covenant, and the lost nearness of Eden. Yet the temple is not the whole building program. Solomon's own palace complex takes years longer to complete. That detail often passes quickly when the story is told, but it matters. The king's house and God's house stand side by side in Jerusalem, physically close and theologically dangerous. One may serve the other, or one may begin to eclipse the other. The Book of Kings never entirely lets us forget how close splendor is to self-glorification. When the temple is finished, the ark is brought up with ceremony. Priests carry the ancient chest associated with the wilderness and the covenant, the symbol that linked the monarchy to a much older story. Then the cloud fills the house so densely that the priests cannot stand to minister. It is one of the book's most arresting moments. Human labor has completed what it can complete. Timber has been cut, stone set, gold shaped, furniture arranged. But only God can make the house truly his. The cloud does what architecture alone cannot do. It makes the temple more than a monument. Solomon's dedication prayer gives the deepest interpretation of the temple in the whole book. He asks that God hear from heaven when his people pray toward this place. When they sin, when enemies defeat them, when drought comes, when famine strikes, when a foreigner calls upon the Lord's name, when exiles turn their faces homeward in repentance. This is not magic. The temple is not treated as a charm that guarantees safety. It is a place where covenant realities are brought into speech. Justice, mercy, forgiveness, defeat, and return all pass through it. That is why the warning attached to the temple is as important as the glory filling it. If the king and the people turn aside, the house itself will not save them. Its beauty cannot cancel rebellion. Its rituals cannot bribe God. This is one of the hardest lessons in 1 Kings. Sacred institutions can be real gifts and still become hollow if the heart moves elsewhere. The temple is magnificent, but it is not a substitute for obedience. For a while, Jerusalem glows with possibility. The promise to David seems visible in stone and cedar. Worship has a center, the kingdom has a heart, but the book places a tremor beneath the triumph. A house may be built for the Lord while another house is being built in the soul of the king, room by room, desire by desire, and that hidden house will matter just as much. Chapter 4. The middle years of Solomon's reign move with the calm confidence of a kingdom at high tide. Administration runs smoothly. District officials supply the royal court in orderly rotation. Trade extends by land and sea. Horses and chariots, the expensive symbols of royal power, are gathered in significant numbers. The realm stretches, at least in the biblical memory, from the Euphrates region down toward Egypt's sphere. Whether every later claim should be read as literal imperial scale is debated by historians, and archaeology does not settle every question neatly. But the literary picture in 1 Kings is unmistakable. Solomon is remembered as the king under whom Israel reached a level of prestige it would never quite recover. His fame becomes international. That matters because wisdom in the ancient world was not only moral insight, it was also political reputation. A ruler known for discernment, riddles, judgment, and practical order attracted admiration far beyond his own borders. The visit of the Queen of Sheba captures this beautifully. She comes not merely as a curious traveler, but as a sovereign from a wealthy trade sphere, likely tied to Arabian roots rich in spices and luxury goods. Such visits were never only personal, they were diplomatic, commercial, and symbolic. She came to test, to see, and to measure. What she found, according to the text, took her breath away. Yet even that scene can be heard with double meaning. The nations are coming to Solomon, yes, but what do they come to see? Wisdom, wealth, architectural grandeur, table service, court ritual, all of it together. That is the point. In kingship, external glory and inner substance become hard to separate. A wise ruler should create order that can be seen. Still, visible success can slowly teach a dangerous lesson. That if things appear secure, they must be secure in the sight of God. The writer begins planting warnings without breaking the surface of the narrative too abruptly. The people are still sacrificing at high places before the temple is complete. And even after the temple rises, the instinct toward decentralized worship does not vanish easily. High places were common across the region, local shrines on elevated sites associated with sacrifice, memory, and local devotion. Not every such site carried the same meaning, but in the theology of kings, the multiplication of worship sites creates a pattern of divided loyalty and blurred obedience. The issue is not only geography, it is authority. Who defines worship and where? Solomon's own statecraft deepens the tension. His wealth depends on labor systems large enough to strain ordinary households. The text speaks of forced labor and levy. Great building projects do not emerge from noble vision alone. They require bodies, transport, quotas, and time taken from families. In a tribal society with older memories of land inheritance and kin-based freedom, centralized extraction could feel less like glory and more like burden. A king may celebrate infrastructure, while villagers count sons missing from their fields. This is where the contrast between David and Solomon begins to matter. David's kingdom was forged in movement, conflict, and personal loyalty. Solomon's is managed through structure, revenue, and expansion. One grows out of battle, the other out of administration. Neither is pure, but the second carries temptations the first could not carry in the same way. Bureaucracy can turn people into numbers. Trade can turn covenant identity into an accessory of prosperity. Success can make the king feel less dependent on the God who gave it. The book also notes something that later law in Deuteronomy had warned about in advance: the multiplication of horses, gold, and wives. That triad matters because each one is more than a private indulgence. Horses represent military trust and foreign dependency, often linked to Egypt. Gold represents accumulation beyond need, the seduction of visible security. Wives, especially royal wives from abroad, represent alliance networks that bring gods, rituals, and loyalties into the palace. Solomon's marriages are not gossip. They are geopolitics entering the soul. Even the splendor of Jerusalem carries a subtle irony. The city becomes a center of pilgrimage, wealth, and royal display. Yet the covenant vision of kingship was never supposed to rest on splendor alone. Israel's law had placed the king under instruction, not above it. He was to remember he was a brother among brothers, not a god among subjects. 1 Kings lets Solomon rise to astonishing heights, precisely so the listener can feel the seriousness of what will follow. Decline is most tragic when it begins from genuine greatness, so the rain shines. Silver is spoken of as common, cedar is plentiful. Nations listen. The king speaks proverbs and songs. The age seems blessed from every side. But a blessed age is not the same as a faithful one. That is the deeper warning. Prosperity can hide fracture for years. A heart may remain outwardly successful, long after it has begun, quietly and almost politely, to turn away. Chapter 5, The Fall of Solomon, does not arrive all at once. That is one reason it feels so human. He does not wake one morning and renounce wisdom. He drifts. The drift happens through what looked at first like manageable accommodations. Alliances become attachments. Attachments become loyalties. Loyalties become worship. The man who once asked for a hearing heart ends with a divided one. And in 1 Kings, a divided heart is never a private matter. It is a national turning point. The text says, Solomon loved many foreign women, naming peoples with whom Israel had long-standing prohibitions against intermarriage because of their gods. In the political culture of the ancient world, marriages of state were ordinary. Kings used them to stabilize borders, secure trade, and signal peace. But the biblical writer is not interested in normal diplomacy on its own terms. He is interested in covenant consequences. What foreign wives bring into Jerusalem is not only language and custom but cult. Their gods come with them: Ashtoreth, Milcom, Chemosh, and others whose worship had deep roots in the surrounding lands. These deities were tied to fertility, kingship, war, place, and identity. To welcome them into royal life was to permit rival centers of devotion at the top of Israel's world. The tragedy is sharpened by Solomon's age. The text does not present him as a reckless youth, but as a seasoned king whose heart is turned when he was old. That detail matters because it removes easy excuses. Experience does not guarantee endurance. Long success can breed a quiet presumption. A man may spend decades appearing stable and still fail the test of finishing well. The book's moral vision is severe here. Wisdom received is not wisdom preserved unless obedience continues. High places are built for foreign gods on the hills east of Jerusalem, near enough to the city of the temple to feel like a scar on the landscape. It is one thing for foreign residents to carry memory of their native worship. It is another for Israel's king to sponsor shrines. The offense is not mere pluralism in a modern sense. It is covenant violation at the center of a nation whose identity rests on exclusive allegiance to the Lord who brought it from Egypt. The temple still stands, sacrifice still happens, but counterfeit worship does not replace true worship neatly. It sits beside it, making the whole spiritual atmosphere unstable. Then comes the judgment. Because Solomon has turned aside, the kingdom will be torn from his son. Not entirely, the text says, and not in his own lifetime, for the sake of David. That qualification matters. Judgment in Kings is often delayed, tangled with mercy, memory, and prior promise. David's name still shelters Jerusalem to a degree Solomon does not deserve. Yet delay is not cancellation. What the king has done will outlive him. Adversaries rise around the edges of his reign. Hadad the Edomite, Rezon of Damascus, and most significantly Jeroboam son of Nebat. Jeroboam is not introduced as a romantic liberator. He is an able official, a man Solomon himself had elevated over labor forces from the house of Joseph. That detail is important. The future fracture begins inside Solomon's own system. The empire produces the man who will break it. The prophet Ahijah meets Jeroboam on the road and tears a new garment into pieces, giving him 10. The symbolism is blunt because the moment is blunt. The kingdom is about to divide. Yet even here the prophecy is shaped by condition. If Jeroboam will walk in the ways of the Lord, he too can stand. The offer shows that the crisis is not reducible to tribal politics. It remains a covenant matter from beginning to end. Rulers are not exempt from the old demand. Solomon responds like many threatened kings respond. He seeks to kill Jeroboam. The wise ruler who once judged truth between two desperate women now uses power to silence the man linked to his judgment. Jeroboam flees to Egypt, that familiar place of both refuge and danger in Israel's memory. The irony is sharp. The kingdom born from Exodus now begins to unravel with one of its future kings waiting under foreign shelter. Then Solomon dies. 40 years are given to his reign in the biblical account, a full generation. He leaves behind a temple, a palace, trade networks, stories of wisdom, and a kingdom under strain. His life becomes one of the defining warnings of Scripture. Brilliance does not keep a man faithful. Achievement does not protect him from appetite. A strong beginning cannot sanctify a compromised ending. The kingdom he enlarged now stands over a crack he helped make, and his son will step onto the throne just as that crack opens. Chapter 6. Rehoboam went to Shechem because that is where the tribes expected the matter to be settled. Jerusalem was the capital, but Shechem carried older memories in Israel's story. It was a place of covenant associations, of gathering and decision, deep in the hill country of the north. The choice of location already signaled that this would not be a routine coronation. The nation came not simply to acclaim the son of Solomon, but to negotiate the terms under which they would live with him. Jeroboam returned from Egypt as the spokesman of discontent. The people's request was plain: lighten the hard service and heavy yoke your father laid on us, and we will serve you. This is one of the most revealing scenes in 1 Kings, because it shows what glory looked like from below. The Golden Age had an underside, and the northern tribes felt it. The forced labor, taxation, and centralization that had enriched the monarchy had also bred resentment. What Solomon saw as royal order, others had carried as weight. Rehoboam asked for 3 days. He first consulted the older advisors who had stood before Solomon. Their counsel was politically wise and humanly perceptive. If you serve this people today and answer them kindly, they will be your servants for life. Kingship, they knew, could be secured by restraint. But Rehoboam turned to the younger men who had grown up with him, men shaped not by memory of tribal fragility, but by palace expectation. Their advice was disastrous. Answer strength with more strength. Turn pressure into intimidation. Make the yoke heavier, not lighter. His reply is among the bluntest failures of judgment in the royal narratives. He threatens harsher burdens and harsher discipline. In that moment, the kingdom breaks. The northern tribes answer with an old and defiant cry. What share do we have in David? To your tents, O Israel. The united monarchy, so central to later memory, had actually lasted only through Saul, David, and Solomon. Now it's split into Judah in the south and Israel in the north, a division that would shape the rest of the history in Kings. The writer is careful to add that this turn of events was from the Lord, fulfilling what had been spoken through Ahijah. That does not excuse Rehoboam's folly. It places human arrogance inside a larger judgment already set in motion by Solomon's unfaithfulness. The Bible often speaks this way without embarrassment. Men act freely, foolishly, and culpably. God's word still stands through and over their choices. Rehoboam briefly considered force, but the prophet Shemaiah stopped him. The split would not be healed by civil war at that hour, so two kingdoms formed, each with its own fears. Rehoboam feared loss of authority. Jeroboam feared loss of loyalty, and fear is often the birthplace of bad worship. Jeroboam's problem was obvious. If the northern tribes continued to go up to Jerusalem for the great feasts, the old pull of Davidic kingship might work against him. Pilgrimage is never only religious, it creates emotional and political belonging. So Jeroboam established alternative sanctuaries at Bethel in the south of his realm and Dan in the north. He made 2 golden calves and told the people they had gone up to Jerusalem long enough. In the narrative of Kings, this is the foundational sin of the northern kingdom. The act later rulers will be judged against again and again. Historically, the picture may be more complex than the polemic allows. Some scholars note that animal figures in the ancient Near East could function not as gods themselves, but as pedestals or symbolic supports associated with deity, much as the cherubim in Jerusalem framed the invisible presence of the Lord. Jeroboam's move may therefore have been politically motivated worship reform, rather than open abandonment of Israel's God in his own eyes. But the Book of Kings, written from a Jerusalem-centered perspective, frames it as fatal counterfeit religion, and that framing shapes the theological argument of the whole history. The issue is not only image or shrine, it is the presumption that the king can redesign covenant worship to secure himself. Jeroboam also appoints non-Levitical priests and establishes a festival of his own making. He becomes, in effect, a king-priest organizer of religion. That is the danger. Worship is bent to serve state survival. Once that happens, the kingdom may still speak in the language of faith, but the center has shifted. A prophet from Judah soon appears at Bethel to denounce the altar itself, and even Jeroboam's outstretched hand withers before divine power. The warning is immediate. Still, he does not turn back. So the two kingdoms begin not only with political separation, but with competing religious centers, rival claims to legitimacy, and wounded memory on both sides. The fracture is now institutional. Israel's history will no longer move as one house. It will move as two unstable houses, both judged by the same God, both haunted by the same covenant, and both tempted to think survival can be engineered apart from faithfulness. Chapter 7. After the split, the rhythm of Kings changes. The story no longer follows one throne in one city. It moves between capitals, dynasties, and reigns, measuring kings with a relentless moral refrain. Did he walk in the way of David? Did he do what was evil? Did he depart from the sin of Jeroboam? The effect can feel repetitive until one realizes that the repetition is the point. Political change comes quickly. Spiritual patterns endure. In Judah, the Davidic line continues, and that continuity gives the southern kingdom a kind of stability Israel never fully has. Yet Judah is not simply the faithful half. Rehoboam allows high places, sacred pillars, and cultic practices the text condemns. Abijam follows with a divided loyalty of his own. The southern kingdom carries the temple and the Davidic promise, but it also carries compromise. Sacred inheritance does not automatically produce faithful reform. Asa brings a measure of renewal. He removes some idols, acts against cultic corruption, and is remembered more positively than many who came before or after. Even so, the reforms are incomplete. The high places are said to remain in one report, though his heart is described as wholly true. That tension is characteristic of kings. Human rule is rarely simple enough to fit a clean category. A king may genuinely seek the Lord and still leave behind structures of compromise he cannot or will not remove. Partial obedience can still be real obedience, but it also leaves seeds in the ground. In the north, instability becomes almost normal. Jeroboam's house does not last. His son Nadab is assassinated by Baasha. Baasha's line later falls to Zimri. Zimri lasts barely long enough for irony to catch up with him before Omri rises. And Omri proves significant enough that later ancient records outside the Bible appear to remember Israel by his name. He establishes Samaria as a capital, a politically strategic move that gives the northern kingdom a durable center. This matters historically. Israel is not portrayed only as chaos. It forms state structures, urban centers, and dynastic ambitions of its own. But in the theology of kings, Omri's achievements cannot cleanse his direction. Administrative success without covenant fidelity still counts as failure. Then comes Ahab, Omri's son, and with him the conflict sharpens. The text judges him more harshly than those before him, not because he invents every evil from nothing, but because he gives existing corruption royal sponsorship at a new scale. His marriage to Jezebel, daughter of a Phoenician king, intensifies the issue. As with Solomon's alliances, the marriage is political. Phoenician partnership meant commercial advantage and diplomatic strength. But Jezebel does not arrive as a passive symbol of treaty. She arrives with cult, clergy, and conviction. Baal worship had long exerted pressure on Israel, because Baal, in the Canaanite world, was associated with storm, fertility, and agricultural life. In a land dependent on seasonal rain, the attraction was obvious. A god linked to cloud, field, and harvest could feel immediate in ways covenant memory sometimes did not. Under Ahab and Jezebel, this pressure becomes state-backed religion in Samaria. A temple for Baal is established. The issue is no longer quiet syncretism at the edges. It has entered the palace. That is why the prophetic movement rises so fiercely in these chapters. Prophets and kings are not court ornament. They are the voice that interrupts the assumption that kings define reality. Ahijah had already spoken into the division. Shemaiah had halted civil war. Anonymous prophets had challenged altars and rulers. Now Elijah appears, and he arrives with no genealogy of status, no palace permission, and no patience for a kingdom trying to place the Lord beside Baal, as if both could share the same sky. This widening struggle also reveals something deeper about the book. Idolatry is never treated as a matter of private religious taste alone. It alters justice, memory, and public truth. Ahab's generation will show that clearly. When worship changes, law changes with it. When a king stops fearing God, neighbors become prey, prophets become enemies, and power becomes its own argument. By this point, the listener can feel what Kings is doing across its long movement. It is not merely listing rulers, it is exposing the spiritual logic beneath history. Nations do not fall apart only because of economics, succession problems, or foreign threats. Though all of those matter, they also fall apart because the heart of rule becomes false. And once that falseness is enthroned, even a prosperous kingdom begins to hollow from within. Chapter 8, Elijah enters the book like weather before the weather changes. There is no long introduction. He appears before Ahab and declares that there will be neither dew nor rain except by his word. In one sentence, the conflict is defined. If Baal is supposed to rule storm and fertility, then the drought becomes a direct theological challenge. Who commands the sky over Israel? Whose word governs life in the land? Elijah does not argue the point first. He announces it through judgment. The drought strips the kingdom of illusion. Fields crack, water sources shrink, livestock weaken, hunger moves from village to palace. In agrarian societies, drought is never an inconvenience. It is social destabilization. Famines lose seed, debt deepens, and local gods are judged by emptied cisterns. Elijah himself is sustained first by the brook Cherith, then by a widow in Zarephath beyond Israel's borders. That movement is striking. While the covenant people suffer under the consequences of their divided worship, the prophet is fed in hidden places, even among Gentiles. The widow's jar and jug do not fail, and when her son dies, Elijah's cry to God is answered with life. The Lord is shown to rule not only rain but bread and breath. Then comes Carmel. The location matters. Mount Carmel stood near the zone where Israel's inland life met the Phoenician coast, a fitting place for a contest shaped by Tyrian influence and Israelite confusion. Elijah gathers Ahab, the people, and the prophets of Baal. His challenge is simple and unforgettable. How long will you limp between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal, then follow him. The people say nothing. Their silence is one of the book's truest moments. A divided heart often has no clear answer ready when called into the open. The contest is arranged with sacrificial precision. 2 bulls, 2 altars, no fire lit by human hand. The God who answers by fire will be shown as God. Baal's prophets call for hours. They cry out, dance, and cut themselves according to ecstatic ritual. Nothing happens. No voice, no answer, no fire. Elijah's mockery is severe, but the scene itself is more severe still. A religion of frenzy exhausts itself before a silent sky. Elijah repairs the ruined altar of the Lord with 12 stones, invoking the older wholeness of Israel, even though the kingdom now stands divided. He drenches the sacrifice and the wood with water, making the test harder in the eyes of the crowd. Then he prays briefly. That brevity matters. The power does not rest in technique. Fire falls. It consumes sacrifice, wood, stones, dust, and even the water in the trench. The people collapse into confession. The Lord, He is God. The drought ends, but victory does not create ease. Jezebel threatens Elijah, and the prophet who stood unshaken before hundreds now runs for his life. This too is part of the honesty of 1 Kings. Great public courage does not cancel private exhaustion. Elijah goes south into the wilderness, asks for death, and collapses beneath the weight of his own work. An angel feeds him, and he travels to Horeb, the mountain linked to Moses, and the covenant's earliest thunder there. The lesson shifts. Wind tears the mountain. Earthquake shakes it. Fire passes. Yet the Lord is not in these in the way Elijah expects. Then comes a low sound, the still and delicate voice that reaches a prophet who has confused dramatic victory with final renewal. God is not absent from power, but He is not limited to spectacle. Carmel mattered. Fire from heaven mattered. Yet the future of faithfulness will also depend on quieter work. Preserved remnant, appointed successors, unfolding judgment, and obedience that does not always burn in public. Elijah is told there are 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed to Baal. That number is not a statistic to flatter him. It is a correction. He is not as alone as he thinks. The kingdom is more compromised than he feared, but God's work is also deeper than he can see. That is one of the book's most tender truths. Divine faithfulness does not disappear when public life looks lost. It may be hidden, but it is not gone. So Elijah returns triumphant in the shallow sense, but steadied. He anoints the future in stages. He throws his mantle over Elisha. The struggle against false worship is not over. In some ways, it is only entering a harder phase, because public religion has been exposed, yet royal power remains. And power rarely gives up its idols, simply because fire once fell in front of witnesses. Chapter 9. Ahab could listen to prophecy and still not change at the center. That is one of the darkest patterns in 1 Kings. He was not a cartoon tyrant incapable of any response at all. He could hear, fear, regret, and yet remain fundamentally compromised. His reign after Carmel shows how idolatry and injustice belong together. The same king who built for Baal will also reach for a poor man's vineyard, because desire, once enthroned, does not stay in the sanctuary. It spreads into law. Ahab's wars with Ben-Hadad of Aram reveal another layer of the story. Israel's God is not only judging internal apostasy, He is also showing sovereignty over international conflict. Prophetic word accompanies battle. Victory is granted even when military logic seems unfavorable. The point is clear. The Lord is not merely a hill god or a local deity with limited range, as surrounding peoples often conceived their gods. He is free over terrain, armies, and outcome. Yet, after victory, Ahab spares Ben-Hadad and makes treaty where judgment had been declared. Once again, the king treats divine word as negotiable when diplomacy and self-interest make compromise attractive. Then the narrative narrows to Naboth's vineyard, and in that narrowing the moral truth of the whole kingdom becomes visible. Naboth's land lies near Ahab's palace in Jezreel. The king wants it for a vegetable garden, a small desire by royal standards, almost domestic. He offers payment or exchange. Naboth refuses, not out of stubbornness for its own sake, but because the inheritance of his fathers is not a disposable asset. In Israel's covenant world, ancestral land carried family identity, tribal continuity, and theological meaning. It was not simply real estate moving through a market. Naboth's refusal is an act of fidelity to a way of life that royal appetite no longer understands. Ahab sulks like a thwarted child. Jezebel, formed by another political tradition, finds his weakness contemptible. "Do you govern Israel or not?" she asks in effect. Her response exposes a different vision of kingship, one common enough in the ancient world. The king desires, therefore the king takes. She arranges false witnesses, stages a charge of blasphemy, and has Naboth executed. The legal forms remain in place, but truth has been murdered inside them. That is how corrupt regimes often work. They do not always abolish justice first. They perform it falsely until violence wears the robes of law. Then Elijah appears again. Not on a mountain this time, in a vineyard. That shift matters. The God who answered by fire also attends to stolen inheritance and judicial murder. Elijah meets Ahab, where the king has come to possess what he did not own, and he announces judgment with terrible precision. In the place where dogs licked Naboth's blood, dogs will lick Ahab's. Jezebel too will meet a shameful end. The house that used power to devour the weak will itself be devoured. For a moment, Ahab humbles himself. He tears his clothes, fasts, and walks softly. The Lord is here. Divine judgment is not mechanical. God sees genuine abasement where it appears. The disaster on Ahab's house is delayed in part until his son's days. That mercy within judgment prevents the story from collapsing into simple inevitability. Yet delay is not reversal. The moral order of the kingdom has been exposed. The final act of 1 Kings closes with battle at Ramoth Gilead. Ahab, restless and calculating to the end, seeks to recover territory with Judah's king Jehoshaphat at his side. Prophets of the court promise success, but Micaiah son of Imlah speaks the truth they hate to hear. He sees Israel scattered like sheep without a shepherd. He sees the machinery of deception already at work among the royal prophets. Ahab disguises himself for battle as if costume could dodge destiny. It cannot. A random arrow, shot in the confusion of war, finds the joint in his armor. He bleeds in his chariot until evening. The army drifts away. The king dies not in triumphant legend but in slow defeat, propped upright while life leaves him. Later the chariot is washed, and the dogs lick up the blood just as spoken. The image is grim, but it is meant to be. Kings die. Words of judgment stand. The throne is not above the covenant. That is where 1 Kings leaves its listener. Not with a neat conclusion, but with a kingdom spiritually exhausted, politically divided, and still suspended between mercy and judgment. Solomon's wisdom could not save a divided heart. Rehoboam's pride shattered inherited strength. Jeroboam's political fear remade worship. Ahab and Jezebel proved that false religion and public injustice feed one another. Yet through all of it, the Lord remained active, warning, preserving, judging, feeding prophets, hearing prayer, remembering dead, and keeping for himself those who had not bowed. The deeper struggle of the book is not simply between good kings and bad kings. It is between covenant faithfulness and the endless human urge to secure life by other means. Power, wealth, spectacle, alliance, force, invention, and desire. That is why 1 Kings still feels so alive. It knows that the real crisis of a nation begins in the worship it normalizes and in the truths its leaders no longer fear. And it knows something else as well. Even when kingdoms crack, altars are corrupted, and righteous voices seem outnumbered, history has not slipped out of God's hands.